Hello and welcome to the Rask Network. What you're about to hear and see is limited to general financial information only. Please be sure to speak to your financial planner or refer to our financial services guide available at rask.com.au/FSG before acting on the information.
Alex Luck, welcome back to the podcast, mate.
Thanks, mate. Good to be here. How are you?
I'm very good. Always happy to chat with you, and particularly for today's episode, because this one is kind of, I'm at the level for this one. I mean, I am going to be your student because this is an area of finance throughout all of my study, throughout all of my life, that I have neglected. In terms of like personal finances and stages of life, this is the number one thing that I don't know. And not only that, it's probably the most important to me over the next 2 or 3 years. So I am going to just pick your brain on behalf of everyone, and we're going to talk about maternity/paternity. So we've covered off on a lot of other bases around general personal finances, but this one is really interesting to me, and I'm sure for thousands of people that listen to this podcast. So I want to just quickly ask it straight out of the gates. How many people in Everest business, just typically speaking, how many of them are motivated around getting advice on things like maternity or paternity leave or like preparing for kids, just generally speaking?
Yeah. It's something that we discuss a lot, really, to be honest, given the demographic that we typically working with here at Ever as well. So generally, within that demographic, it is kind of that point in time where people are thinking about having kids, if that is the path that they decide to go down. Obviously, if they decide not to go down that path, it's a completely different conversation. But yeah, it is something very important, I think to consider, particularly in this day and age, with housing prices and costs of living, and most couples both kind of having to work to make ends meet, for lack of a better word. So it is very important to at least consider these things and then look at maybe putting some plans in place yourself.
If I'm thinking about having kids, or if we're planning to have a family, apart from the surprise, how far in advance should I ideally be planning? Like if you were to say to people listening to this, they're thinking, I'm going to have kids in the next few years and I should probably know about maternity leave, taking time off from work, what can I get from Centrelink, all these types of things. How far out should they start thinking about those things?
Yeah, and look, sometimes there is a nice surprise, so you can't necessarily always plan for these things. But with a rule of thumb, when it comes to investing or any kind of planning, generally the earlier the better. But if we were to put it to like a perfect kind of time frame, I think kind of 2 years out from when your child's going to be born. So it's basically like, yourself and your partner right now might be like, look, we're thinking about starting to try to have kids in the next year or so. That would be the perfect time to effectively commence it, because once you're pregnant, obviously there's a ticking time frame before that's going to happen. So if you can do some preparation before getting pregnant to a degree, that can really just gives you more options, more flexibility. As we'll sort of see throughout this episode, there's quite a few things that can be considered, and the more you can kind of consider them and plan for them, the more options you'll have.
Okay, so one of the things that people think about a lot is, not just when they've got kids, but in retirement, earlier, whatever, is having an emergency fund. So is that kind of step one?
Yeah, super important, step one. And the thing to consider now as well is like the emergency fund, the level that you might have been comfortable having before when it was just your partner, yourself and your partner, it may be lower than, now that we're going to have a kid, potentially. So we want to up that from 20 grand to 50 grand possibly. So that's obviously the first thing to consider. And again, the earlier you're sort of thinking about this, the more time you've got to allocate to that resource to get that first sort of crucial fundamental box ticked off as well.
Yeah. In terms of, obviously every parent or parents are going to be different, but in terms of what you've seen in advance of people preparing for costs as well. So we've got the emergency fund, which is there for emergencies, both before, during pregnancy and after, like once the child is born. What other big costs should people be aware of? Like just we'll just focus on high level. Like, what other costs are there? Like, I'm thinking, preparing housing or even, just time off. Like, what are those costs?
Yeah, so I think you can sort of categorize those things into a few sort of different sections. So first, there's what stuff do we kind of need to buy? So we're going to need to, probably get a cot, and we're going to need to get a pram, maybe some clothes, things like that. Now, in my anecdotal experience, speaking to clients, and in my own experience personally, because I've got two very young kids myself, is having a baby shower can be quite good, quite lucrative from that point of view, because your friends and family can kind of tick off a few of those options, or sorry, those items, on your behalf, which is handy. I would definitely encourage any parents to definitely look at the secondhand market as much as you can. One thing, again, this is just my personal opinion, not to necessarily stinge out on too much, and that doesn't mean not to get secondhand is the pram, because one thing you don't realize when you don't have kids is you're going to be putting a pram in and out of a car most of the time, and pushing it around a lot. So having a decent pram, I think, is definitely worth the investment, because just there's generally the more expensive models are just so much lighter, which again, after a while, your back will sort of thank you for if it's half decent from that perspective. The housing, were you sort of getting at there, whether we're just simply got to have enough space to begin with? Yeah, so that's a really important consideration, and something which does typically go hand in hand as part of this conversation, right? It's like, okay, we're now going to start a family. We're living in a 1-bedroom apartment. How is this kind of going to go long term? It's probably not going to work, and that doesn't mean that you again take a massive knee-jerk reaction, sell that immediately, or get out of that lease immediately, and then go and buy something else, because a lot of the time as well, remember, when you do have that first kid, they are going to be a newborn for at least 6 to sort of 12 months of their life. So they don't need that much space to begin with. Let me tell you though, once they start walking, then suddenly they do need a lot more. So it is, again, there is a bit of a time limit on that, but that is something very important to sort of think about in terms of, okay, is this going to be enough space for us? Because a lot of the time it's just simply not, because you didn't have a kid when you bought this first place, or you rented this first place. It just didn't cross your mind. Didn't cross my mind when we bought our first house or anything like that. So the more planning you can do behind that, because there's obviously borrowing capacities come into a deposit. Generally, people are upgrading at this point of their point in their lives as well. So they're generally buying a more expensive property, which just obviously requires, more funds and resources there too. And because of that, that decision is very important as well, because without trying to think too far ahead, like what about schooling districts, or is it a case of moving closer to support networks like family and stuff like that as well? So again, all these things take time and money. So that the earlier you can kind of think about that, I think the better. So that's obviously a big cost which can go with this. And then obviously, like I said, there's the other items that you need to potentially purchase, which in all honesty, provided you don't go crazy and buy, everything brand new and the most expensive version of everything, because bear in mind, they do grow out of stuff pretty quickly as well, which was something as a new father, I hadn't really thought about necessarily, and I was quite shocked at how fast they sort of grow, and they're moving up sizes, all the time. That's not too much of an initial outlay, and clients a lot of the time when they talk to us are really worried about just how much it's going to cost in that first year. And in all honesty, the newborn doesn't cost that much money, particularly if you are able to breastfeed naturally as well. It's the real cost is that loss of income. That's what really can hurt.
Right. So question, if I just backpedal slightly to the property, this is something a lot of people would think about. They're in that apartment, or even if they're in like a 2-bedroom, even a 3-bedroom, right? Because some people work at home. You've got, your bedroom, you've got the office, and you've got that extra one. But when a baby comes along, you've got your bedroom, baby's room, office, then nowhere for anyone else to stay. So that 4-bedroom sweet spot is what we see kind of like middle Australia. The problem that you have, and you alluded to it there, is that if you do want to upgrade from your first home into that home, which is the family home, that is going to cost money and probably some borrowing capacity, but you're about to lose a wage. So I'm assuming one of the first cabs off the rank, so to speak, for you and the team is to ask the client or ask us, do you want to upgrade? Because if you do, you should probably think about doing that now.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Because not only are you going to lose an income, you're also going to gain a dependent, which also hurts your borrowing capacity as well. So
true. Yeah. Didn't even think about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So, which again was also surprised me how much in the calculation that actually hurts your borrowing capacity. So, so you basically cop a double whammy. Yeah. You lose a wage plus you gain a dependent. So, you're absolutely right. The earlier you can think about that whilst you're both still working full time and potentially even before you are technically pregnant, you might be trying per se, making that move will be a lot easier from that perspective. And what we do when you come to see us is, we look at that first and foremost, but then we also, forward test, okay, cool, we've upgraded that house. Mortgage is obviously more expensive. Now let's also lose a wage or we'll take a wage to half. What does that look like? Okay, we're going to have to make a few sacrifices here and there, but it's not going to be too bad. And realistically, you're not going to be going out, clubbing, every weekend anymore either once you've had a kid. So there'll be areas of your life where expenses will reduce anyway as well. So it may not be that much of a sacrifice anyway, but it's something that potentially would be off the table had you waited till, that child was now born and now you wanted to upgrade, not because you couldn't necessarily afford it practically, you were willing to make the sacrifices, but you don't have the borrowing capacity. So
the bank won't give you the money.
The bank just doesn't give you the money. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a big one to prepare in advance. In terms of things that people can do with their careers, is there anything that people can do in advance with their careers even, or do you think about that much? Like you got the two parents, which one's going to take some time off? How's that going to work? That type of forward planning?
Yeah, 100%. And very much, we'll ask clients, so, does your employer pay you any mat leave? And some do, some don't. Sometimes there's a case that you've got to be there 12 months as well. So being a bit strategic about when you fall pregnant may make some sense from that perspective as well. Yeah. And then definitely planning out. So, if you've got a couple and, per se both employers offer mat leave, the first year, the female may be the primary carer at that point in time, and then the male may be, or the other partner may be the primary carer in that second year as well. So we can definitely plan for that. What we generally do as well is check for your eligibility for Centrelink entitlements too. So the government, provided you're under a certain income threshold, will pay you some mat leave as well. So look, it's not heaps and heaps of money, but it's definitely better than nothing. And it is going up every year in terms of the number of weeks that you're getting. So it's currently at 20 weeks. I believe it's going to 22 weeks next financial year, all the way up to 26. So they are actually increasing that amount of payment. And what we did in my own personal circumstance, what we were allowed to do is my partner works in the public healthcare sector. So she was entitled to 3 months of full pay, which we were able to take at half pay as well if we wanted to. And we were also entitled to the Centrelink benefit too. So we got that. So we're pretty lucky in that respect. So a lot of it is just checking with your employer, because sometimes they will pay mat leave, but if you opt to take the Centrelink, they'll offset that against that as well. So I've seen that from time to time. So it really is quite bespoke in terms of where you work. And some people, the employer pays nothing, and then you've got the Centrelink, and that's kind of it. So, but knowing that in advance really matters, right? Because it literally happens, overnight. Like we had a Caesar, which basically they it's like you go in and half an hour later you've got a child that you now need to care for, and your partner's income is now gone as well. So it can be a little bit daunting from that perspective. So the more you can kind of plan for it, the better, which just takes any financial stress out of it, right, as well. So you can enjoy the moment, enjoy being with your partner and your child too.
So is it possible, just broadly, like you don't have to give us the specifics because I'm sure these things change that often. Roughly, where is that Centrelink limit? Like if I'm earning $300,000 a year, I'm not, but if I was, would I be eligible, or is it like Is it sliding scale? How does that work?
So it's taxable income.
Right.
I would need to just recheck it off the top. But yeah, off the top of my head, broad-based figures, I believe it's around about sort of the 140, 150 mark, that if you go above that, you're not eligible. So it is relatively high. That's well above the median salary in this country. But yes, if you are earning your 300 grand or your 200 grand, then potentially you're not eligible. And as we've, chatted about on other sort of podcasts together, like, it's a progressive tax system, remember, as well. So the more you earn, the more they take. So whilst, you might be going like, 300 grand's a lot of money, which it is, remember that person's also paying a lot of tax. So not going from that to then no income, trust me, will still hurt.
For sure.
Every time.
For sure. So then the question is, can you take, like, if your employer offers a mat leave, can you take that as well as Centrelink, or does that just depend on Centrelink, or does that depend on the employer? Like how does that work?
You can from a Centrelink perspective, but from an employer perspective, it's potentially, I've seen written into the contract before that if you opt to take that as well, it will be offset. So say this, like, because I think the Centrelink entitlement right now, it works out to be somewhere between 16 to 20 grand is basically what you get. And say your employer is like, we'll give you 3 months or 6 months, which works out to be 30 grand. But if you take the Centrelink, we'll effectively just give you, the difference. So I've seen that from time to time as well. Also, like, again, depending on the employer, when you can take that. So some of the bigger mining corporations, have often quite generous mat leave and paternity leave situations. One of my good friends, she just had a baby the other day, and she's effectively doing mat leave for the first 12 months. And her husband, he works for, I think it's FMG from memory, but he can take it 12 months at any point in the first 24 months. So he's going to take it from sort of 12 to 24, which is really, really handy. And that's going to be really helpful for them, and obviously, quite a significant advantage over most people in that situation. But again, he's fortunate where he works, and he's been strategic about it. And yeah, so again, it really does come back to your own situation, but it's really good to do the research on if they are going to pay it to you when you're eligible, because sometimes if you've only been there less than 12 months, it's not payable based on the contract too.
Yeah, so check that contract. And this is where if you are thinking of switching jobs, factor this into your cost basis and how you're risking, so how you're thinking about risk in terms of having children, financial risk. There's a lot to consider there. I would also call out that, like, if you're not in that situation, maybe you can make that move in your career now. Maybe there's some other things that you can do from a passive income, have a side hustle. Can you maintain that? Can you make some more money before kids come? And I mean, you mentioned before the house. I just want to click on that the house is a big thing to consider as well. Like, what that asset becomes in your life is really important. Okay.
So if I can interject very quickly on that. So, like, something that we practically do. So like, right now, you've got a partnership and they're looking to potentially start a family and they need to upgrade that home. What we're able to do, again, is to forward forecast, okay, you hypothetically purchase it. Now, how does your cash flow work? And then we go down to one income, okay, keeping your lifestyle the same. So making sure we can still have a holiday, still buy our coffees, and, not be on, just having lighting candles every night and eating baked beans. But we still have our lifestyle. There will be a shortfall for that year only of maybe 15 grand, right? So we bank that in savings before we go, before we start. So then when we go into that and that all gets executed, we don't have to worry because we've already covered that shortfall for that year. And then our plan was, post that, you've got to resume back part-time, and that will more than cover, whatever we need to do as well.
A friend of mine also did something, and I don't know if this is that common, where they refinanced their property. So they got the bank valuation. They effectively refinanced and they redrew some equity, or they just put it in an offset account, so that during the first couple of years when they had their two kids, they had, I don't know, let's say what it was, 100 grand. They had 100 grand sitting there that they weren't sure if they were going to touch, but at least they redrew that equity to just sit there in the offset account while they did go down to one income, and they weren't sure how things would happen, because ordinarily that would just be, their loan obviously went up, but at the same time, they kind of built a buffer out of redrawing equity. Have you ever seen that happen?
Yeah, 100%. And also, even potentially refinancing back out to a 30-year loan again, which reduces your repayments. Obviously, the understanding is post that 12 months, you then look to sort of catch that up. But in all these things, like at the end of the day, it's a sacrifice to have kids, and it's something that you want to do. So there is going to be this income hit, but it's also understanding and not worrying too much about the fact that it's a very small period of time. Like we're talking maybe 1 to 2 years generally when the income is going to be quite subdued, per kid, I guess. So over the long term, it's not going to matter so much. So you definitely need to plan because, 1 to 2 years is still a decent period of time as well. So you don't get caught out. But I do see clients sometimes sort of being like, oh, we're just going to be, really struggling like forever and ever. And it's like, no, because as soon as you go back full time, you can see everything's hunky dory and, we're all good to go. Plus you've got, a beautiful child now to care about who got. So
yeah. Pros and cons, eh?
That's it.
So I've got another question, which is more like this big unwieldy question, which I'm just hoping you can speak to generally. It's just around childcare. I'm led to believe, don't have kids myself, but I'm led to believe that this is a huge shock for people when they see how much childcare can cost. Can you talk through that, like just generally speaking, what people can expect, but also from a financial planning perspective, maybe just generally how rebates or those types of things work?
Yeah, and they have recently changed this as well, so it's a lot better than it used to be. So it's worked off a combined income between yourself and your spouse in terms of when these rebates effectively kick in. And it used to be more of a hard dollar figure. So effectively, I think it was if you were earning more than 152,000 taxable income, it would reduce from 50% down to 30. It's now actually a sliding scale right down to I think 350,000 combined, which is a lot better. But yes, it is definitely something to consider and have a chat about because it's probably the kind of the only major expense, all things being equal, that is kind of possibly going to occur in that first 12 months. As I sort of said before, like if you're lucky enough to naturally breastfeed and stuff like that as well, in terms of feeding costs for the child, it's basically zero, right? And you can set a lot of the clothes you can get secondhand and everything like that as well. So it's not necessarily a huge outlay, except for that childcare component, because some people, are not lucky enough to take the full 12 months off. They might only be able to take 4 months off or something like that. And then they do need to go back to work either part-time or full-time, in which case, and they may not have the family support either, in which case childcare becomes, a real thing there. And yeah, look, it's expensive at the end of the day. Even with the subsidy, it's still a little bit of a killer, unfortunately. But what you want to do is know what those thresholds are and try to be as smart as you can in terms of making sure you're on the right side of the threshold as well. So there are some things that you can do with that without getting too much into the weeds there to sort of make sure that you're on the right side of those thresholds as well, because that can make quite a big difference as well.
So one of the things I was chatting about with a mate recently who's expecting his kid this week actually is private healthcare. Now we have private healthcare, but we don't have it for pregnancy. So just generally speaking, can you just explain that, not necessarily from like how it works day to day or when you arrive at the hospital, but can you just explain from that insurance perspective what people should be aware of as they prepare to have kids?
Yeah, so it's a very, very good point. So you do generally need to have the cover, in place before you give birth. It depends on the insurer, but I believe sort of 6 months is the rough kind of sort of time frame there. The one thing that I didn't realize they do, which is actually probably which is a good thing from what I can sort of see, is that waiting period. It's not like a hard and fast, like if you weren't pregnant before this, you don't get it. It just may be a case of like, part of your pregnancy isn't necessarily covered and then it is. So I didn't actually realize that until a little while ago. So I had some clients that got it a little bit later, and her first 4 months of being pregnant, all those tests and stuff weren't covered by anything. But after that, she'd sort of seen her time through, and then effectively it was. We personally went down the private route ourselves. So my partner's been paying for like full like top private health cover since she was like 19, which is just ridiculous. So we've wasted so much money on that. That'll be the one thing I'm actually looking forward to potentially getting rid of and getting that cost down a little bit more.
Yep.
But yeah, so there are, if that is the way that you sort of decide to go, you do need to have that in place, sort of, again, before you're sort of pregnant, is generally sort of how that works. We obviously have a very good public system here. I don't know how much you want me to talk on sort of the pros and cons. To me, it's just a personal choice. So again, we went private. The reason that we did that is we really wanted a bit more hand-holding. And look, we had a great experience, and I wouldn't do it any differently again. My sister went public, so I was pretty close to sort of her experience as well, and that was largely, perfect sort of as well. I guess the key difference, if I can break it down, is just probably how much attention you get is probably the easiest way. So, for example, both times, we were in hospital for a week, and there was certainly no pressure to leave or anything like that. Whereas my neighbor had her son a little over a year ago now, and she literally gave birth that morning, and that afternoon they were politely sort of wheeling her out the door because there was nothing wrong with her at that point in time. So the private system allows, again, like a little bit more protection maybe from that. Just creature comforts, which again for our first one was what I really found invaluable, because the nurses and the lactation consultants and the physio, they really give you the time of day, really sort of teach you sort of how to do it. Whereas you would definitely learn. Obviously we've survived as a human race. You don't need that. That's not a necessity, but it's a nice to have. And like I said, if that's important to you, I think it is definitely worth it. And the expense overall was definitely a lot less than what I thought it was going to be as well.
That's interesting. Yeah. So with our private health insurer, it's HCF, we probably could have gone to the pregnancy level of cover, but we didn't in the end. I did a lot of research on this back in the day, and the more finance brain of me was kicking in, and I was like, we can pay for an obstetrician if we want to do that. And we can pay to go into one of those hospitals if we want to. But we have a pretty good public hospital right near us, and where my sister was born. And we thought to ourselves, all else being equal, we'll probably be there, and we can get into that hospital system. We investigated that. We spoke to obstetricians in the area, as well as our GPs, to get information on how that could work. And it was interesting because a lot of the consistency that comes with having kids in a private system seems to be around, like you said, the time and the consistent face that you get throughout the process. But yeah, we are more than happy to stomach the cost of seeing someone during the pregnancy phase. It's the same person the whole way through.
Yeah, it depends where you are. One of our advisors, Kathy, she just had a little boy the other day over there in Victoria too, and I think that's what she sort of opted to do as well. So, but my understanding, just briefly talking to her and then hearing what you're potentially planning to do too, is it is probably slightly different state by state over here. So in WA, for example, it certainly seems, at least anecdotally, more of you're public or you're private. There's not kind of the option to be public and then pay for some private services necessarily. So yeah, it all depends on area. I know over here, again, depending what catchment you fall in. So if you are going to go public, generally certain people or couples prefer to fall in a different catchment, because that means they go to that hospital as opposed to the other hospitals. So you get, like anything, right? You just got to do your own due diligence. And but yeah, it's definitely worth spending half a day doing your own research. One thing I haven't done, which is slightly off topic or a tangent of, is I haven't opted for family private health cover personally.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I've got my own, and my partner's got our own. We will in the future. We definitely will as our kids get a little bit older. But there is so much funding for children in the public space, because hey, we all love kids, right? So they get the political vote. That's where we want to put our money. So there is, over here in WA, we have Perth Children's Hospital, which is a brand new hospital. It's absolutely fantastic. We had to take my daughter there the other day for a little mini emergency, and it was, she was fine. So, but yeah, so she was perfectly fine. So, but it was, it was a great experience. So the resources, I think, again, depends on your area and stuff like that. But to me, I looked at it, and the additional cost to go to the family sort of plan, to me, just doesn't seem worth it just yet.
Interesting. So people should be aware of that, calculate how that works for you. And because the family level of cover and pregnancy cover can be a lot. If you're thinking you are going to do private versus public, there are some great articles online, so such as Choice does some really great work in this regard. So go and check out their literature and some of the stuff that they've explained. There's some wonderful explainers that choice.com.au have on their website. You can use the privatehealth.gov.au website to look at insurance policies, see what's covered. It was simplified a couple of years ago to have like bronze, silver, gold, and all that sort of stuff. But just be mindful of the pregnancy level of cover. Is there anything else, if we're sitting back listening to this, kids on the horizon, just anyone listening to this, things that people should be aware of? So we've covered costs of things that people might need and how to maybe keep those costs down, thinking about the house and borrowing capacity, thinking about careers, maternity and paternity leave, those policies, how they interact with Centrelink benefits. We've spoken briefly about daycare and how there are thresholds and a sliding scale there. Anything else that you want to leave us with, mate?
I think that largely covers it, to be honest. I think from there, it goes into, a similar podcast we did the other day around sort of private schooling, because then you're kind of thinking about, okay, great, my child's now born and I've set all that up and I'm happy with that. And the foundations are now in place. And then it's kind of that where to from there kind of conversation. I think, largely what we said today, even if you do half of those things that we just said, you'll be in a significantly more prepared and better position going into this, as opposed to trying to wing it. Because, the generation debate, it goes back and forth and all these sorts of things about cost of housing and who had it better and stuff like that. But I'm a millennial, so I can only speak from my own sort of experience. And I think these days you have to plan for these things, because if you don't, a lot of the time it can really go wrong. And it doesn't require much planning, however, for it to go very right, if that makes sense as well.
Yeah, a little bit of effort goes a long way. This has been heaps of fun. I know you and your team at Everest Wealth, you deal with people right across the country, and your bread and butter is people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s who are just at this phase of life, who have kids, young, old, or soon to be, or plan to be in the future. So people can get in contact with you. There's a link in the show notes to say, find a financial planner. You can get into that link and answer a few questions, and you'll be matched with a financial planner. So please go and check that out. Alex is back on the show pretty regularly. So we do ask the financial advisor for his expert opinion on many different topics. We did a Q&A recently. So send in your questions. There is an ask a question link in your podcast player. Don't forget to subscribe and say good day wherever you are on social media. Alex, it's always a pleasure, mate. So thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Owen. That was really good fun.
Cheers.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.